Hello, folks, and welcome to Sensory Friendly Saturdays. My name is Victoria, and I'm a host at the Ontario Science Centre. And today I am joined by Carly Greenberg, who is a social worker from the Geneva Centre for Autism. While our audience may be watching from different politically defined regions, we acknowledge that we are all participating in this event on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. I'm speaking to you today from Durham Region. We acknowledge that the land I live on is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nations. Carly is joining us today from the city of Toronto. We acknowledge that the land she lives on is a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Acknowledging the relationship to the land is an ancient practice, and today we would like to express our gratitude for the opportunity to be here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land since time immemorial. If this is your first time at a Sensory Friendly Saturday event, a warm welcome to you. For the last few years, the Ontario Science Centre and the Geneva Centre for Autism has partnered to bring you hands-on workshops, presentations, and discussions for all ages and abilities. Sensory Friendly Saturdays occur on the first Saturday of every month with new topics to learn about. If this is not your first time at this event, welcome back. It's so great to have you here with us again. First of all, a big thank you to Carly for joining us today. Would you like to share a bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Good morning and welcome, everybody. So I am a social worker at the Geneva Centre for Autism, as Victoria mentioned. And so that involves a lot of different hats. One of those hats is helping parents and caregivers of children and youth with autism, helping them to navigate the different supports and services at the Geneva Centre as well as in their communities. I also provide some other direct support, such as parent support groups and other clinical programs. So it's lovely to be here with all of you this morning.
Wonderful. Again, very happy to have you here as well for this very important presentation and discussion. Now, before I throw it over to Carly to begin her presentation, I just want to remind everyone in our audience that throughout this presentation, you can ask questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You have the option to ask questions anonymously if you wish. After the presentation, Carly and I will take time to go through your questions and answer them. Now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Carly to begin her presentation.
Thanks, Victoria. Just bear with me one moment as I share my screen. Okay, so welcome everybody to today's event. Today I'm going to be speaking to you about a topic that is quite prominent in the minds of parents and caregivers and educators, and that's the topic of talking to kids about ASD or autism spectrum disorder. So thank you to the Science Centre and Sensory Friendly Saturdays for the opportunity to share with you today on this topic. So because we're at the Science Centre today, I'm going to try and guide us through this rather broad and nuanced topic using some highly scientific and investigative questioning. And those questions include, what is autism? When to talk to kids about autism? How do we talk to kids about autism? Why do we talk to kids at all about autism? And a really important question of where can I learn more? So sharing some resources with you today. And as Victoria mentioned, we're going to end with time for a Q&A to address some of your specific questions. So to get us started, I'm going to introduce a poll just to kind of find out who is in our audience today. Do you come to us as a parent or caregiver? Are you an educator, a teacher, or an EA? Are you an individual with autism spectrum disorder, or somebody else? So we'll just give you some time to get those answers in. Okay, the poll is closed. So mostly parents and caregivers here today, so welcome. We also have quite a few educators, so welcome to everyone, and I hope you'll take something away from today's presentation. Okay, so I want to start out with a bit of an acknowledgement that it's really normal to have concerns and worries about talking about tough subjects with kids. So for the teachers that are here today, you might be thinking about the risks and benefits of talking about autism with your class. For the parents and caregivers, of course, you're going to be thinking about the risks and benefits of either talking to your child with autism or their brothers and sisters. So it can be really helpful to take some time to process some of the emotions that might come up for you on this topic and build a bit of a support network for yourself. So you can go into these conversations feeling confident and ready. And certainly I hope to help you along that journey today. So another poll to get us going here of how you would rate your current knowledge of ASD or autism spectrum disorder. Would you say you're extremely knowledgeable, somewhat knowledgeable, you have some limited knowledge, or no knowledge at all? And certainly all knowledge levels are welcome today. So I'll give you some time to get those answers in. Okay, we have most of the votes. All right. Okay, excellent. So most of you are coming with somewhat knowledgeable, right? Some of you are extremely knowledgeable. So maybe you're able to even share some of that expertise in your Q&A and some limited knowledge as well. So welcome to all, everyone who's here today. So it might be helpful for us then to start off with a really important question of what is ASD or autism spectrum disorder? It's going to be difficult to explain to your child or be able to answer questions without really developing your own understanding first. It's important to go into those conversations feeling comfortable and ready. So I really encourage parents and educators to first do their own research and understanding of ASD. And certainly I'll share some resources at the end of the presentation today that might help you continue on in your learning. So we know that ASD, autism spectrum disorder, is a neurodevelopmental disorder, meaning it's associated primarily with functioning of the neurological system and the brain. It's the name used for a specific set of behavioral and developmental challenges. And the graphic to the left there highlights a couple of these key areas. One of those being impairments in social communication and social interaction. So this might look like social challenges with social reciprocity, back and forth exchange of communication, nonverbal communication like gestures and body language and facial expression, developing and maintaining relationships, so might appear as an absence of interest in peers or difficulty with play and interaction skills. Another key area of autism is restricted and repetitive patterns of behaviors, interests, and activities. So this might look like repetitive movements, insistence on sameness and routines, restricted and fixated interests, or hyper or hyporeactivity with certain sensory input, meaning an oversensitivity or an undersensitivity to certain sensory stimuli. There's also this area of additional criteria, which means that these needs must be present in early development, although they might not fully manifest themselves until social demands exceed capacities. They have to be of some clinical significance and not explained by another diagnosis alone, such as intellectual disability, global developmental delay, or language delay, although we do often see these diagnoses in addition to autism. That red arrow on the graphic represents the word spectrum in ASD, meaning there's a range within the diagnosis of how these areas present themselves. Now, an arrow might imply that this is linear. You might move from more autism to less autism, but in fact, spectrum might be better represented with an image like this. A unique set of strengths and abilities and needs in all different areas, such as motor skills, language, executive function, which is a set of mental skills such as memory and flexible thinking and self-control. All of these are going to combine to give a distinct social communication and behavior profile for each individual. Now, this graphic comes from a comic named Rebecca Burgess, who is an autistic comic artist and illustrator, whose work I'm going to introduce you to a little bit later on in the presentation. also want to take the time to acknowledge that this is also ASD, a vast array of strengths and abilities and skills and values, some of which are listed on the screen in front of you. Thinking and learning in a visual way, being passionate about a topic, strong sense of loyalty. This is often the other side of the coin that so often gets overlooked when we're discussing ASD, and I really wanted to take the time to highlight these strengths today. So it's time for another poll. So a big question that we often get asked at Geneva Centre is, when is the right time to talk to children about autism spectrum disorder? So this is a poll that does have a bit of a right answer, but we'll see what your thoughts are. Is it when they're 5 years old? There's no exact age or time. When they're a teenager and might be able to understand the information better? When they start school? Or when they receive an ASD diagnosis. So this is one you might have to take a moment to think about. So we'll give you some time and you can put in what you think the best answer might be. Okay, so the poll is closed. And then if we're able to share those, all right. So 83% said yes, there is no exact age or time. And in fact, that is what I would say, right? And the next slide is going to dive deeper into that a little bit more. Okay, so when do we talk to kids about ASD? And absolutely, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. There's so many different factors that we want to consider in helping us to determine if it's a right time to talk about autism, right? We want to consider the abilities and social awareness of the child. We know there can be a distinction or discrepancy between a child's chronological age and their mental age or maturity. We want to think about that child's receptive language skills, their temperament or personality. Are they a child that's generally amenable or closed off to feedback about themselves from others? These might give you some clues about readiness to receive this information. And while there's no one-size-fits-all approach, there's certainly some helpful what we might call prerequisite skills that could be helpful in determining whether a child is ready to explore a diagnosis. One of those being some awareness of difference from others. So this might be, present itself as statements like, I can't go to the mall because it's too loud, or maybe even starting to ask some questions, right? Like, why do I need a support person with me at school? These observations and questions bring natural opportunities to talk about strengths, needs, and differences for everyone, which lay the groundwork for talking about autism down the road. Without this context or awareness of differences, it can be overwhelming or maybe even a bit frightening to learn about an aspect of yourself that you might have very little awareness of. Now, for the educators and teachers in the audience today, I would say the same points really relate to talking to your class about autism, although maybe with an emphasis on being proactive. So perhaps there's a child with autism in your class, or maybe a child with autism in the school. It can be helpful to have conversations from the onset about strengths and needs and differences, which will foster an environment of acceptance and inclusivity. Of course, another natural opportunity is if students begin to make observations or ask questions like, why is that student receiving extra support? Or why is that student behaving like that? Again, social awareness of difference can start really early on, as young as children in kindergarten. So starting these conversations early and having them often can have immense benefits for all students. And a quick note about parents thinking about having this conversation with siblings, with brothers and sisters, the same points really relate. That sibling might start to become aware of difference between themselves and their sibling, and this will help create natural opportunities for discussion. Okay, so I'm going to introduce another poll, because when we start talking about when, it can create some uncertainty or fear or worries amongst adults, right? So this poll is really about, what is your main fear or worry about discussing autism with your child or with your students? A, you might say the wrong thing. upsetting that child. They might become distressed, that child not understanding, that you might get emotional in that conversation, or something else other. Okay, so the poll is closed. Wow, so almost, kind of even across the board, right? Which tells me that there's all sorts of different worries and fears out there. A few of you put in other, so I encourage you, if you have a specific question that you want to discuss around a worry or fear, please feel free to put that in the Q&A, and we'll try and address that at the end of the presentation today. Okay, so we're moving into how do we talk to kids about autism? And I want to preface this by saying that there is no instruction manual. As I mentioned before, there are so many individual aspects to consider in exploring these topics with kids. So these are just some general tips and tools which may be helpful to have in your toolbox. So in general, we want to approach conversations from a really positive, strengths-based approach. So we know that individuals on the spectrum have a wealth of valued strengths and skills and interests, and this is what we most want to highlight in conversations about autism. We chatted a bit before about, a prerequisite skill of some awareness, and we can really work on building that awareness as well, right? Starting with basics, which can be used with really young kids, talking about likes and dislikes or observable traits like, I like watching movies, I don't really like soccer, or you wear glasses and I don't, right? Then we can kind of advance to talking more about strengths and challenges. So I can read really quickly, but I find multiplication difficult. Or I know a lot about dinosaurs, and sometimes I can't stop talking about dinosaurs. And certainly for the educators here today, this can be done as class exercises, right? So as much as we want to focus on, differences and unique abilities, there's also a lot of commonality that can be found in terms of strengths and challenges between students. Over time, you want to start using the information that you know about autism, what it is and what it isn't, to start to build the connections between particular patterns of strengths and challenges and how that might connect to autism spectrum disorder. In those conversations, particularly when we're talking about challenges, we want to help students or children identify what we call compensatory skills. And that's finding unique strengths to accommodate for challenges. So for example, a child might struggle with writing, but have excellent computer skills. And maybe they've learned to type out assignments instead of writing. Or a child might get really overwhelmed in a busy environment, but they are really great at asking to take a break and self-advocating for their needs to help them calm down. A few other helpful tips to keep in mind. We really want to consider how your child learns best. So I acknowledge that today I used a lot of examples that highlight children with verbal capabilities to express themselves. This does not mean that it's not possible to explore a diagnosis with a child that might communicate differently. I just want to encourage you to think about how that child learns best and expresses themselves best. Is it helpful to use videos, pictures, or books? Do you use social stories with that child, which might be a helpful tool in explaining this topic? Or can your child benefit from some verbal instruction or direction? I will share a book list at the end of the session today that might be some great resources to get you started. You also want to expect conversations to be ongoing. So all children, but particularly neurodiverse children, might have shorter attention spans or process information differently. So it's okay to expect for shorter conversations over a longer period of time and finding those small opportunities to continue exploring together. You also want to allow space for all types of questions. One tool that might be helpful with this is creating a question box. This can be done in a classroom or within your home. Children can either write in questions, type in questions, verbally record their questions that they might think of, even after a conversation has been initiated. This will also allow the adult teacher to be able to take some time to take in those questions, research and plan how they want to respond. It's also really important to validate emotions that might come up, and this includes for you and also for your child. So it's certainly common to see some big feelings or challenging behaviors that might pop up around tough conversations. So you want to be responsive to those cues that your child is giving you or that you're giving yourself to be able to make space for that and respond. All right, moving into our next question of why do we talk about autism spectrum disorder with kids? Why is it so important? And I'm going to share some of the benefits with you today. It can provide context to strengths and challenges your child might already be aware of, right? So it's a bit of an explanation and understanding of why they might struggle in certain areas and excel in others. It can help foster a sense of community and lack of isolation. That is so important, right? To feel less alone, to know others are experiencing similar areas of need. Sometimes, for some individuals, the diagnosis label itself provides an automatic community to feel a part of. It's also the stepping stones of self-advocacy. So as parents, you may be the one primarily advocating for the supports and services for your child at this time. But it can be really powerful to see individuals on the spectrum gain comfort and skills in advocating for themselves and their own needs. For the teachers here today, it's helping you to create awareness and belonging within your classroom, which is so important, especially as children age and social interactions become more complex. And so important, it's an opportunity to address myths, misconceptions, and misrepresentations of ASD. We know there's a lot of misinformation out there. So children might hold really rigid ideas of what a person with autism looks like or behaves like, when in reality, we know there's so much diversity within the spectrum. So some common myths you might hear are like ASD is contagious, kids with autism never speak, kids with autism don't want to make friends. So talking about autism is an opportunity to challenge and correct some of that misinformation that's out there. All right, a really important question of where can I learn more? So today we were only able to brush the surface of a vast and nuanced, important topic. So I do encourage you to continue your learning and utilize the additional resources to help you navigate having these conversations with kids. So on the left there, some resources of what is autism, and I believe these are going to be shared in the chat and will be emailed out in a follow-up email as well. So don't worry about scrambling and writing these all down right now. So resources to help you with your knowledge of ASD, some resources of explaining ASD to kids, including siblings and peers. I'm actually going to highlight a couple of these for you right now. So the website, The Art of Autism, has access to these wonderful comics. I mentioned Rebecca Burgess earlier, who's an autistic comic artist and illustrator who created these works with the assistance of other autistic advocates. So here, our Spectrum of Voices is a wonderful comment for neurotypical peers who want to understand a little bit more about individuals with autism. And Understanding the Spectrum, that comic of Archie, is really designed for individuals on the spectrum to help them learn a little bit more about what the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder is. For my teachers in the crowd today, the Organization for Autism Research is a wonderful tool. It is an American resource, so do keep that in mind when you're perusing the website. But they've developed some wonderful materials to help guide you in your conversations with your class. They have a video called What's Up with Nick, which can be found on YouTube, and we'll link that as well, which tells the story of a new student in class named Nick who has autism. And the video is through the eyes of his neurotypical peers as they they learn more about Nick and his needs and how they can be a good friend to Nick. OARs also develop some really wonderful concrete lesson plans and workbooks for kids from JK to grade 8. And there's also some great toolkits for parents as well, particularly on supporting siblings. So a couple of workbooks that they have on their website, one for younger siblings and also for teenage siblings. They can help guide you even further in having those conversations with brothers and sisters. This is a book list that was provided to us from the Autism Awareness Centre in Alberta. So they have a huge slew of different books that you're able to order. The ones I've highlighted here today are specifically for children, for neurotypical children, children on the spectrum. So especially for those visual learners, kids that benefit from social stories, these can be really helpful tools to have as well. And in the green, it's just specified a little bit more the audience of that book and who it can be really helpful for. So again, this is going to be shared with you. And lastly, I want to plug the Geneva Centre for Autism, where I work. We have many great tools and resources that can help you continue on in your learning journey. So Sonderly is our training division platform. So primarily trainings designed for educators and other professionals, although we do have many parents that access those as well. Through the Geneva Centre, we also have free parent education and training workshops and webinars. To access those, you do have to be a client with us. So I did link our intake form. So if you live in the city of Toronto and you have a child or youth with a diagnosis of autism up to the age of 18, you're able to open up a file with us and access all of those free parent education and training workshops. So thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to the presentation today. I hope I was able to provide a little guidance and support in helping you navigate talking to kids about autism. So I do see a few questions in the Q&A. We'll open it up now for some questions, comments, and reflections. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll throw it back to Victoria.
Perfect. Well, that was excellent, Carly. Thank you. I love how you broke all the information down into what, where, how, and so on. I know for myself that was really helpful, so I hope that was helpful for everyone else in the audience as well. And through the Q&A, we're getting a lot of great questions, and we're also getting a lot of feedback, great feedback about audience own experiences and worries as well. That question about fear. I know a lot of people have fears and it's hard to discuss, but this is an open and respectful place. So please, if you have any questions about that, please feel free to ask. So we're going to start with our first question from Noreen. Would you be able to do a presentation in our class?
Oh, well, thank you. That tells me that something I said today was of value to you. So that's thank you for that offer. So at Geneva Centre in the social work department, we do some community outreach. Of course, with COVID, things are looking a little bit different. It depends on our capacity. I would say for those types of inquiries, you can connect us through our intake line. So actually, I can type this in right now, the phone number. So 416-322-7877, extension 513. And then you'll be connected to someone that can answer your question or provide you with some resources, other community organizations that might be able to meet your request.
Perfect. And I just want to address, we're getting a couple questions asking if the documents and links that Carly's mentioned and that are being put in the chat will be made available after this webinar. Yes, they will. You will all be receiving a follow-up email next week from this webinar where all resources will be provided then as well. All right, another question from our audience. From Crystal. I want to know how to explain autistic behavior in a way that makes my child comfortable with an autistic classmate. Find a way not to just say there's something different in their brain. Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. When we think about, quote unquote, autistic behavior, I mean, that could be lots of different things. Perhaps that child is engaging in some stimming behavior that, children might have questions about, or, other behaviors, maybe experiencing some meltdowns when they get overwhelmed. I would actually just kind of normalize that we all have ways of coping with things that are hard for us, right? So it's not so much about the difference of how that individual copes, but just that everybody has ways of coping, right? So we know stimming behaviors or meltdown behaviors are actually a signal, right? A signal that that child might be having a hard time, or a signal that maybe they're trying to regulate and calm themselves down. So I would encourage you to have conversations with your child about ways that they cope when they're feeling overwhelmed, because that's a really normal experience, right? Things they do that might make them feel better, and just kind of normalize that everybody has those ways of, taking care of themselves and getting their needs met. That's a great question.
Yeah. We're getting more questions about if this webinar will be recorded and be distributed afterwards. It will also be distributed afterwards. So you can share this as a resource with fellow teachers, fellow caregivers, parents, whoever you'd like. So yes, it will be made available for you all. Thank you for that question. I'm so glad everyone's enjoying this. All right, our next question comes from Elizabeth. What should we tell a child who asks, why can't I do things that my classmates do? That's a good question.
It's a good question, right? And that kind of goes back in the presentation, that awareness of difference, right? And we know for kids that's powerful and it can start really young, right? And it's important, right? It's important to feel included and accepted. And so it sounds like for that child, they're starting to realize, right, that there's some areas that they might just be a little bit different in. So I would really highlight the strengths and unique abilities of that child and try and find ways that they feel connected and connections in common with their classmates as well, while at the same time validating that, yeah, it can be hard, right, when we feel different or our needs might be different and you feel a little bit singled out. Sometimes that's an opportunity to introduce a diagnosis so that child can learn that, there's actually lots of other kids out there that might struggle in these areas or need a little bit of that support. Of course, you're going to want to consider the individual needs of that child, but it sounds like it's, an opportunity to really chat a little bit more about strengths and differences in everyone.
Very true, very true. We have another statement here that actually relates a lot to the question that you just answered that I'll read from Maeve. My child already has feelings of low self-worth. No matter how positively I pitch differences, and I do, I worry he will ultimately view it as another negative about himself.
Yeah. And I mean, kids have a tough go sometimes, right? There's a lot of pressures, like I said, a lot of drive to feel included and fit in. I think, it's interesting as parents, there's so much emphasis on building up your child and, making sure they know their strengths and they know their abilities. But there's something powerful too in kind of connecting with this piece of, sometimes I have a hard time with this too. Right. And really validating that piece of, I might not have all the answers, or it's okay to feel a little bit sad sometimes too. Right. Also helping your child to discover those strengths and abilities for themselves can be more powerful sometimes than a parent or an adult telling that to the child. Right. So creating lots of opportunities to try different things that will help your child kind of discover for themselves areas that make them feel good and give them some of that self-esteem.
Love that, the empowerment. It's very important. We have a question here from E. Martin. My fear around talking about autism with my class is how to make sure the class remains supportive and does not stigmatize the student with ASD. The other students are already aware that he is quote unquote different, but I want them to continue to also see the strengths he has. Any thoughts about this?
Yeah, really great question. And an understandable kind of concern, right? I mentioned, that teachers are going to be thinking about the risks and benefits and having conversation about autism. And certainly a risk might be that that child does feel, a little stigmatized, or that the students might not have the skills yet to know how to respond to that individual student. So there's lots of opportunities for teaching, for learning more about that student. I would also, if possible, involve the student with autism. What information is important for them to feel like their classmates understand about them. Some of the resources I shared today, I think, are going to give you some more tips and strategies around that. But I think, having the conversation opens up the door to feel, an environment of inclusion and acceptance. And it might take some time, right, for students to really understand how they act in that, right? But
Yeah,
yeah, really good
exactly.
question.
Yeah, totally valid. All right, another question we have here from Kate. Any high-level tips on how to deal with the impact of COVID on some of the challenging behaviors slash coping for ASD children? Very, very good question.
Okay, interesting. So it sounds like this parent is speaking about, maybe not being able to access some of the resources or supports that they previously relied on. Maybe you're seeing like an increase in some challenging behaviors, without the typical routines and structures that were in place for that child before. So that's perfectly understandable, right? I think all of us have been affected in some way, shape, or form by COVID and the changes that it's brought. So I would, encourage you to, approach it from a place of understanding. Like, of course, there's going to be some challenges that pop up. I think, routines are so powerful for individuals with autism. So as much as possible to help create those routines and sense of normalcy and following a schedule can be really helpful to, in, helping that child to feel safe and secure. I would continue to seek out, the virtual supports that are available for yourself as well. So like parent support groups and parent education and training. There's some really nice ones out there. I know Surrey Place has developed some specific groups on helping parents cope around COVID-19. Geneva Centre, we have our parent support groups to help parents in those moments, because you're certainly not alone in that. And that's being felt kind of broadly across the community.
Very true. Now, I actually have a question for you,
Sure.
Carly. Um, do you have any additional points that a parent or teacher or caregiver might consider when explaining to a child that their sibling has autism spectrum disorder? Because that can also reflect how things happen at school as well, just family relations.
Absolutely. And we know sibling dynamics can be tricky, right? Sometimes we might see some jealousy between siblings in terms of the time and support that their sibling with autism may be receiving. So, as much as we want to have these conversations and provide information to that sibling to help them understand, differences and strengths and needs, it's important to acknowledge the other needs that that sibling may be expressing, right? So they may have a need for special time with a parent, with mom or dad, right? They may have a need for a break from time with that sibling, going back to COVID, everyone home together right now, right? So it's really important to kind of listen for the underlying need of that sibling, as well as providing the information and the resources. So there's some wonderful sibling programs out there in the community. We have a sibling group at Geneva Centre that we're working to get up and running. Autism Ontario has some sibling supports, as well as the OAP, the Ontario Autism Program, Foundational Family Services. Because, after some, initial conversations with a sibling, it can be helpful for them to connect with other siblings, other brothers and sisters who might have similar feelings or questions. Again, decreasing that isolation, helping them feel a part of a community, right, of other siblings that might be experiencing similar things.
Yeah, excellent points. Now we have a question and an opinion in the chat that I'm going to kind of put together.
Okay.
So an opinion that a child's diagnosis is private information, and
Hmm.
yes, it can be. And we have a question from an anonymous audience member. I have a child in my class with ASD. However, his parents have not told him yet. How would you suggest talking to my class about this, as he is stimming a lot more since we returned to school?
Great question. And, it's something that comes up a lot around school advocacy and, parents and teachers like working together to figure out a plan. So it can be challenging, right? As a teacher, if you see a need in your class, but maybe, parents haven't disclosed that to their child or aren't comfortable with that information being shared, right, with
Mhm.
classmates. So I really do encourage communication and collaboration wherever possible, right? If you see a strong benefit of helping children in your class understand autism, then it could be helpful to reach out to that family and share that, right? Discuss what some of the fears or barriers or risks this family might see as being present and work to address those. Now, sometimes within, a curriculum, there might be an opportunity to talk about autism a little bit more broadly, right? Without, it might be a risk, right? That then students then connect that to that individual. But I would just try and have those open communication conversations, with the parents as well, to try and come up with a plan that benefits everyone, that everyone's comfortable with.
Exactly. And I have another question here that kind of relates to what we were just talking about. How might advocacy play a role in sharing a child's ASD diagnosis with the school?
Right. So we've talked a bit today about strategies for talking about a class with autism. And I want to emphasize that if these conversations are in response to a particular student with autism, it's important to involve parents and school staff in developing a plan and an approach for sharing with the other students. I think this is kind of what the other teacher was mentioning before. Some parents might share a diagnosis with the school in order to access supports and services, but they might not yet be comfortable in disclosing that with others. If it is decided between parents and school to discuss a child's autism diagnosis, as much as possible, you want to provide opportunities for that student to be involved in educating and advocating within the classroom, however they are comfortable. So really, it's a collaborative effort in, educating other students.
Exactly. So another question, again, that sort of relates with that. Is there anyone else other than a parent who can have conversations with a child about ASD? And I know we've talked a lot about teachers, but is there other folks, maybe guidance counselors, I'm wondering? Is that appropriate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if we're talking about, sharing a child's diagnosis with the child, you want to think about who your child is most comfortable with,
Mm.
right? Now, often that's a parent or a caregiver, but maybe there's a grandparent or an aunt or a cousin that they have a really close relationship with, right? It can be helpful to get them involved as well. It can also be helpful to seek guidance from helping professionals in your child's life. So maybe there's a developmental pediatrician, a therapist, a teacher, a guidance counselor, an EA, right? Someone that your child has a connection with that can be a valuable additional resource in exploring a diagnosis with your child. So I encourage families to be creative. Like I said, there's no instruction manual, there's no one size fits all approach, but you're really going to look at your individual child and develop a plan that would best meet their needs.
Well, I wanted to share a quick comment that we just got from an audience member, William. I'm a person with autism, and this is very good information. So thank you so much for
Thanks,
joining us
William.
today and for
Welcome.
sharing that.
Thanks.
Love that. There's actually a lot of great discussions happening in the Q&A, so don't forget, if you have other opinions or more questions, please feel free to share those with us. We're here for about another 15 minutes. The conversation keeps going. And I just want to remind everyone again that all the links that are being sent in the chat, everything that Carly has referenced today, books, resources, videos, will be shared in the follow-up email later next week. Now, another question that I have, because I know, again, it's a very important topic of conversation, but there's a lot of fear around it, is more common myths and
Mm,
misconceptions, maybe that children have about ASD. Do you have any tips or explanations for that?
Yeah, so I shared a few, before in my presentation around, autism is contagious or it's an illness, right, that can be treated. And we know that's simply, not the case, that children with autism aren't interested in connecting with others, or a really damaging misconception that individuals with autism are uncaring or unempathetic in nature. And that's just simply not the case, right? People with autism have the capacity to experience strong emotions and empathy, but perhaps not in the way neurotypical people might recognize. So, in fact, some individuals with autism actually report they are over empathizers, meaning that they tend to absorb and take on the mood and energy of those around them, and in particular, those they care about. And that can be really overwhelming, right? It might cause, it might help from that they might shut down or become overwhelmed. So it actually helps us realize that they're actually very empathetic and have strong capacity for connection.
Yeah, very true. Just looking through the Q&A, looking for any more questions. So again, if you have some more, feel free to send those along. We have a question here from Karen. Why do they have Sesame Street with autism? Do you want to explain maybe the advocacy or significance behind that?
Sure. So you might be referring to the character of Julia, who was introduced in Sesame Street a little while ago. It's one of the resources I linked. I think Sesame Street's always done a great job of, advocating for lots of different populations, trying to show a wide representation of children of different backgrounds and experiences. So I think it was really timely, right, that they had a character on Sesame Street who had autism. I think Sesame Street is wide-reaching, so it's really powerful to think about all of the kids and parents and families watching at home who are going to start to learn a little bit more about, individuals with autism, their strengths, their needs. And it's a great kind of sounding board or platform for parents to then continue those conversations at home, right? And inevitably, kids are going to have questions about Julia, right? Or maybe they're thinking about another child or student that they know that is similar to Julia, right? And they'll start to make those connections and how they can also be a friend to someone with autism.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what Sesame Street is doing. Exactly. We have another question here from our audience. Are there any support groups out there for Black parents with children on the autism spectrum disorder or have autism spectrum disorder? Sorry.
Yes, there actually is. And I feel like I'm going to get the name of it wrong. But I think it was actually one of the panelists who was at your last Sensory Friendly Saturday. So I think it was a couple of parents who started up this group. Rachel, maybe you're able to share the name or a link to that group as well. If not, we'll certainly follow up with an email. But yes, there was actually just a new support group created specifically for BIPOC families who want to connect with others in their community.
Perfect. Yeah. Just as Carly mentioned, the last month's Sensory Friendly Saturday webinar was about supporting Black families with autism. So if you would like to check out that webinar, I highly recommend it. It was phenomenal. You can find that on the Ontario Science Centre website under Sensory Friendly Saturdays or on our YouTube channel as well, Ontario Science Centre.
And I do see that Rachel just put in the chat, the Black Parent Support Group meets on Tuesdays, and an email to register for that.
Perfect. All right, this will be our last call. If anyone has any last minute thoughts, opinions, or questions for Carly, throw those in the Q&A right now. If not, we will be wrapping up shortly. And again, just a reminder, you will have all of these resources sent to you next week in a follow-up email, and you can check out other Sensory Friendly Saturday resources from the past at our website, and that link will also be shared in the chat. All right, I'm just going to do one last little sweep over the Q&A box. We're getting a lot of thank yous to Carly, so yes,
thank you.
Much deserved. All right, we'll do one more quick little look over. And if you have any questions that you think of later as well, you can also please feel free to reach out to the Geneva Centre for Autism or the Ontario Science Centre, and we can also get your questions answered that way. You can reach out to us through our website, our social media, or our emails. All right, doesn't look like we're getting any more questions, so I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you for joining Carly and I today for this really important and beneficial discussion. And once again, a huge thank you to you, Carly, for taking time to share your expertise with us. Do you have any final words for our audience before we end?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to the Science Center, Sensory Friendly Saturdays for having me here today. Thank you to all of our participants, parents, caregivers, educators, individuals on the spectrum for your thoughtful questions and reflections. I think, showing up to an event like this and being eager to learn is a powerful step, right, towards a more inclusive and welcoming community and environment for our individuals on the spectrum. So thank you for attending and listening, and I hope something of value was able to resonate with you today.
Perfect, absolutely perfect. Now we invite you in our audience to subscribe to our newsletter for details about upcoming events with the Science Center and also upcoming Sensory Friendly Saturday events. The link will be found in our chat or at our website, ontariosciencecentre.ca. Like I mentioned before, if you'd like to learn more about Sensory Friendly Saturdays, you can find more information again at a link that will be posted in the chat or once again at our website, ontariosciencecentre.ca under Plan Your Visit, Sensory Friendly Saturdays. And we would love to hear what you thought of today's event. We're getting lots of thank yous in the chat, but we would love to know more of your thoughts and suggestions for future sensory friendly Saturdays. So after this Zoom has closed, a link in your browser will pop up for you to complete a short survey to share your thoughts and opinions on today's event. You can join us next time, Saturday, April 10th, 2021, for another workshop. Now, please note that is actually the second Saturday in April, as the first Saturday is a holiday. So once again, thank you all for joining us. I hope you learned as much as I did and enjoyed as much as I did today. Thank you. Stay safe, everyone, and have a great day. See you next month.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.